Good morning. My name is John Talk. I'm the rector here at Emmanuel Episcopal Church, and I'm so glad to be able to join with you for our third installment of a study, of an exploration, of a meditation on the Beatitudes. As we discussed a couple of weeks ago, there's a number of versions depending on what your translation is. The translation I prefer the best, especially for today, is the New Jerusalem Bible, or the Jerusalem Bible, whichever one you have. It seems to me to be a little bit closer to the ethos, the spirit of the original. And today we're reading Mark 5, verse 4. Happy are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Happy or blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, what does it mean to mourn, I guess, is the first question, or perhaps even, what does it not mean to mourn? What is Jesus not talking about? I don't think that Jesus here is talking about episodic grief, not talking about the grief that comes from those moments in our lives of deep and profound sadness, of horror, of terror, the death of a spouse. That's not what he means. That's significant and it's important, and God is with us in that time. But I think Jesus is talking about something else here. Jesus also isn't talking about a lifelong depression, a clinical depression, if you will. That's not at all what Jesus is about. Jesus doesn't want us to be depressed. Wants us rather to be whole, to be complete, to be happy in God's love, not to be the sufferer from a mental illness. Nor is Jesus talking about being dour, looking like a dour Puritan on the foothills of the Berkshires, working their way across Massachusetts in 15 whatever. Not talking about being long-faced and judgmental. Rather, I think that what Jesus is talking about probably comes from his own experience. And so far as I can recall, there are at least 3 times in Jesus' life that we have in the New Testament where we see Jesus crying, where we see Jesus weeping, where we see Jesus mourning. And each and every one of these times, he's not mourning for himself, rather he's mourning for the world. He's mourning, trying to find his place in the world and trying to find his role in God's economy, in God's household. The first time, well, maybe not the first time, but one time, John 11:35, famously the shortest verse in the King James Bible, Jesus wept. John 11 is the chapter in which Jesus finds that his friend Lazarus has died. If you recall the story, Jesus has been ignoring calls to go to Lazarus to bring him healing. He's been saying, oh, he'll be fine, he'll be fine, he'll be fine. And then as he's walking up to Lazarus' house, there are Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, in tears. Jesus hears the news that his friend has died, and Jesus wept. Another time we find Jesus crying out, maybe not tears of grief, but certainly crying out in mourning, is in Matthew 23, where Jesus cries out for social and political blindness in Jerusalem. He's reminding folks that Jerusalem is a place where prophets are rejected. And then the third and last time we see Jesus mourning, Jesus weeping, is in Mark 14, in the Garden of Gethsemane when he's on his knees crying because he's searching for God's will in his life. Do you want me to go to that cross? Do you want me to continue preaching? Do you want me in this world? Do you want me by your side? Where is your call in my life? And as he searches for that call, he's plunged into the realization that the world is not the world that God has designed it to be, and that he particularly is called to do something about it. The world is not as God has designed it to be, and thus Jesus is called to the cross and ultimately to the resurrection. So I wonder if this might be our space too in our mourning. That our true mourning is when we look out onto this world and we see brokenness that God didn't design. When we see people in pain, when we see people who are outcast, when we see people, other children of God, our brothers and sisters, whoever they may be, living in a space of brokenness. And then we are forced then to recognize that we're called to do something about it. When we see the schizophrenic man walking down Route 1, we're called to do something about it. When we see the mother and her children living in a car, we're called to do something about it. When we see a spouse fighting with their loved ones, we're called into love in that space too. We're called into places of brokenness. And it's this grief, it's this mourning. Happy are those who mourn. It's this mourning that opens ourselves up to seeing the world through God's eyes. And it's this mourning that opens ourselves up to being God's hands, to recognizing that we're called not simply to treat the symptoms. The homeless schizophrenic man being hungry, it's easy to buy him a sandwich. But we're also called like Jesus to address causality, to bring wholeness into this world. Now, in a situation like that, it's hard to know what to do, right? It's almost impossible to know what to do. We've been fighting with each other about how to treat that particular circumstance for decades now. But however we address any of these issues, when we come with a broken and mournful heart, when we come with humbleness, a willing to listen, a willing to see ourselves not only in the situation, but helping to bring wholeness to the situation, we are, like Jesus, helping to create the kingdom of God. And happy are those who create the kingdom of God, not simply today, but forever and ever. Amen.